I'm NAN JIA from the Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California. This is the second mini lecture on the application of organizational economics in strategic management. In this video, I'll discuss some research about business groups and in particular what they do to their members and the relationship among these members. So business groups are very prominent organizational structure that is very common around the world. I will discuss what the business groups are a little bit later, but first I'd like to discuss why is this topic relevant to institutional and organizational economics. So there are three reasons. First, the tension created by the separation of ownership and control, which is a fundamental theory in organizational economics, is the root theory for a very prominent perspective of business groups, which is the tunneling perspective. And second, business groups typically is regarded as a form of hybrid organization. Some would call it that way because it exists in between firms and the market, which I'll illustrate when I introduce definition of business groups. And lastly, how business group function is critically shaped by the institutional environment where they are located. So what are business groups and why do they matter? Business groups typically consist of legally independent firms bound together by formal and/or informal ties. So even though many business group members they are independent entities and many business groups that are not legal entities themselves, the business groups are often able to closely coordinate their member organizations in terms of economic activities. So therefore, some call it a hybrid form of organization. Business groups are very common in emerging markets, and according to a review paper provided by Kana Yafei 2007, you will see in the next page is a map of the countries on which business group research has been reviewed by Kana Yafei 2007. They are widespread in many emerging markets and some more developed countries. So a common research question of research in business groups is, what are the relationships among group members, and in particular, how do economic resource flow among different members of the groups? Very highly intensive debates of multiple theoretical perspectives. One prominent theory is called the tunneling view of business groups. So what is tunneling? Tunneling refers to the mechanism that the ultimate owner of a business group would transfer resource from a partially owned member of the business group, a partially owned firm that is in the business group, to fully owned firms that is in the business group. For example, I own 60% of ownership in firm A, whereas I also own 100% of ownership in firm B. And tunneling perspective would predict that I would engage in some sort of a dealing. For example, I would make firm A to engage in unfair deals with firm B, such as firm A would sell their products and services at a discounts or buy product services at a price premium from firm B. In that way, I actually lose, for every dollar that firm A loses in these transactions, the cost is 60 cents on me, but I gain 100% of that $1 of transfer in firm B. So this mechanism allows me as a controlling shareholder to expropriate firm value, the value of the firm in which I have partial ownership at the expense of minority shareholders in that firm. And this is typically enabled by the pyramidal control. Some classic citations include Claessens et al. 2000. The general theoretical root of the tunneling perspective is again the separation of ownership and control, which is a classic problem studied by a large body of literature, starting perhaps some of the most prominent ones include Jensen-Merkley in 1976 and Farmer and Jensen 1983. So the key theoretical mechanism here is the gap, or the separation, the gap between cash flow rights and control right. And researchers also provided empirical evidence for the tunneling view. One example is Bertrand et al. 2002, in which the authors observed the following pattern. A positive shock to a particular industry, such as a windfall, would pose more profit independent members of that industry than the members in that industry that are affiliated to a business group. So the authors would infer that the group actually tunneled that actual profit that were gained by firms in this industry because of the windfall to the industry. So as the second prominent theoretical view of business groups is called the propping up view. So what this is that business groups would help member firms to overcome market failures, especially when the outside institutional environment is underdeveloped. Economic and institutional environments are underdeveloped. The theory this propping up perspective draws on include internal market theory by Leff, 1978, and the institutional void theory in a series of writings by Tarun Khanna, including his review piece, Khanna in Yafei in 2007. Third theoretical perspective on business groups is the co-insurance view. This view predicts that a business group member will receive support from the parent firm when the member experiences some financial difficulties, and it will lend support to other members of the same group when other members experience some challenges. And some empirical evidence was provided by Fisman and Wang 2010. The co-insurance view differs from the tunneling perspective and propping up perspectives in two ways. Number one is that for co-insurance to exist, the parent firm should not perpetually tunnel resources out of one member or perpetually propping up another, such that the resource can flow in and out of any member firm. And number two is that the timing of the resource flow is not random. The timing of the resource flow is very much linked to the financial difficulties that these member firms would experience. And so next, I'd like to discuss the empirical evidence in support of the co-insurance perspective provided by a paper I co-authored with some colleagues in 2013. So let me take one step back to discuss a common approach in empirical studies of business groups, which is that because of the difficulties of getting data about business groups, a very common approach is to look at the overall performance of these groups. For example, Bertrand et al. 2002, a classic piece that we reviewed a little bit earlier today, used the overall performance changes to overall performance following windfalls in the industry. And this was challenged, for example, by Siegel and Chowdhury in 2012, because after all, this approach by looking at overall changes to performance does not actually show what is actually going on with the resources. We do not have direct evidence of the resource flow. And the challenge of Siegel and Chowdhury, as a challenge, they proposed some alternative explanations that were consistent with the changes in the overall performance. In our paper, we were able to make one small step forward by providing more direct evidence of resource flow among business groups in China. So a typical business group in China comprises of a parent firm, which we call the controller. They control the key strategic decisions and the key leadership of their member firms. A number of some firms, and sometimes it includes a public listed firms. So we take advantage of opportunity that all public listed firms are required to disclose the internal transactions, which are called connected transactions or related party transactions. These are the transactions that occurs between this listed firm and any other member of the business group that this listed firm is affiliated to. In addition, the mandate requires that the listed firm disclose the type of related party transactions into loan-based or non-loan-based. The loan-based related party transactions refers to inter-corporate lending, such as listed firms will lend money to the members of the same business group, and loan guarantees, which is, for example, the listed firm provides guarantees to members of same business groups when this member was trying to get loans from banks. So, and the second type of related party transaction are the non-loan based. They include internal purchases and sales of goods or of assets, of leases, and the formation of new joint ventures. So we analyze the related party transactions of all publicly listed firms for about 11 years from 1998 to 2008. So here are the key findings. Number one, we find that when a controller experiences a credit crunch, which is proxy, which is captured by their collateralization of their controlling stakes, then three things happen. Number one is that the loan-based related party transaction increased. We found that when the controller experienced a credit crunch, the value of loan guarantees provided by listed firm to the controller increased by 15.2%, and the value of intercorporate lending provided by listed firm to this distressed controller increased about 30.4%. At the same time, the non-loan-based related party transaction decreased by about 10.7%, which refers to the reduction of resource flow from this distressed controller to the listed firm. The second set of findings is that when the listed firm experiences performance dips, this will increase their risk of being delisted, which is a significant loss of value. The non-loan-based related party transactions would actually increase by 18.5%. To summarize what we found in this paper, we provided the following graph. So the graph shows that, number one, resource could actually flow both ways. It's not perpetually tunneling from the listed firm or perpetually propping up the listed firm. And number two, there's a timing issue here, which is that when a controller experienced financial difficulties, we see resource flows into the controller, whereas when the listed firms experience financial distress, more resource flow from the controller to the listed firm. And number three, a type of resource that flow in and out of listed firm seems to be different. Listed firms seems to provide more loan-based support to the controller and other members of the business group, whereas it receives a lot of non-loan-based support from the affiliate business groups. We provided more direct evidence of resource flow within certain business groups in China, but we do not conclude that the co-insurance theory holds everywhere. Instead, what the literature or what we need to do more is, number one, is to collect more direct evidence and less inference about what is going on between these member groups. And number two is to consider idiosyncrasy of business groups that exist in different institutional environment because they are bound by different institutional rules.